welcome back. Rianka, thank you for coming on and being my guest today.
Yes, Alison, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, well, this is a topic that I have been so excited to cover for a while because it comes up all the time. And if you add to that rising interest rates, which, no one can stop talking about these days,
Oh yeah.
it becomes a it becomes a slightly different conversation. So the topic is rent versus buy. Should you rent or should you buy? And you are my lovely guest. You were recommended to me by by a friend, as you being a great certified financial planner. And I wanted to have a CFP on because the conversation of rent versus buy oftentimes comes down to someone's personal financial picture and their plan.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And while I feel lucky to get let into my clients' lives often very quickly and finding out what their goals are, sometimes takes a little bit of pulling the layers of the onion back to truly know, if this is the right decision for them. And frankly, once they've engaged with me, they've decided that they want to usually do one thing, rent or buy.
Right.
So I wanted to bring you on and see if you could give a different perspective to everybody who's trying to kind of figure it out. So thanks again for coming on.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And Alison, let me tell you how perfectly timed this conversation is. Well, one, just like you said, I work with quite a few millennials, especially in the DMV area. And this is a topic of conversation that comes up very frequently with my clients because we're all entering into different life stages, whether it's getting married, expanding our family, etc. A lot of the core discussion is, where are we going to live? Right. And school zones. And it's like just so much. But this is so timely because I just had a friend call and was talking about her rent prices and how it is increasing by $500. Currently, her rent is $2,000 a month, increasing by $500. So that's 25% increase.
Wow.
Alison, I haven't seen that level of increase in a while. And I'm like, let me check state laws. Is that legal? Geez, 25%, $500. That's $6,000 a year. So of course, I have my CFP hat on, like cash flow. How does that affect you?
Sure.
So
yeah. Yeah. Well, I think we're hearing a lot of these stories, like anecdotally, or we've lived them ourselves at some point, right? Everybody has some push normally to go into buying a home at some point. And it's either just some personal thing you've decided you want to do, or very often it's some kind of like financial push. Like I've gone on air before saying that I had a rent price, and this was 11 years ago, that was $2,000 a month. And what happened was that rental was less than stellar. And I had a roach infestation. And I was like, I'm not paying this much for this. And I was like, if I'm paying this much, I might as well buy. So that was my push. So everyone's got their story, right? But right now, with us coming on the tail end of a pandemic where a lot of things were frozen, you couldn't even actually do rent increases for a long time. The district and various areas around the country had freezes so that you couldn't increase rent. There's a moratorium on all of that. And this has all now been lifted in varying degrees around the country. So we're seeing this really come up a lot again.
Yeah. And I think what's happening is inflation. I think we're tired of hearing about it, like inflation. But honestly, we are the end consumers, especially if we're renters. We're the end consumer as renters, and the price is going to get basically pushed to us. It's going to get transferred to us.
Yep.
So the cost of labor has increased, the cost of gas. I just filled up my tank today and I literally walked out of my truck and was like, Jesus, I got gas, because I was on my phone, just chilling, waiting for the tank to fill up. And I was shocked. So that is happening a lot, especially in the DC area where we have apartment buildings that has nice amenities like a pool or gym facilities. Just the cost of care and the cost of upkeep is increasing. And so unfortunately, it's going to get passed on to your rent.
Yeah. So I think that the overall, we can kind of start, and I'm sure we'll circle kind of back to this at the end, but a good way to just kind of start talking to anybody who's trying to figure this out is to know that, one, there's not some catch-all answer for everybody, that this truly is personal and comes down to you evaluating or having somebody help you evaluate your goals, what you have at your disposal as from money and, resources and whatnot. And that, sometimes it makes sense to rent and sometimes it makes sense to buy.
Right.
I've been very public in saying before that I think a lot of real estate agents are always saying buy, 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 or sell, 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 because, people think either one, we truly believe that that's a good way to accumulate wealth, or, some people think it's just because agents are schmarmy or whatever. I'm not in the schmarmy camp. I do believe.
Well, I was going to say, Alison, just even from your intro of just going down the line of this kind of mental checklist of like, does this make sense for you to buy right now? Or should you be a renter? Like, yeah. That is very commendable.
I have told people point blank, I think you should rent right now. Because it comes down to, again, all these things we're going to talk about. So let's just start breaking it down. So for me, the number one thing you need to think about when you're trying to decide in this particular area, of course, we're trying to keep this limited to the DMV right now, though if people listen outside of this area, I'm sure a lot of this will also resonate. But
I think so.
One is, how long are you going to actually stay here in this area or in the place in which you're living? And I will put a small caveat onto that saying, or how long can you own or hold on to that property?
Ooh, I like that.
Yeah, thanks. Because there are statistical break evens as far as when you buy, and you have a larger cost when you sell. So in the DMV, there's transfer taxes on both ends, but when you sell is where the commission comes from. And the commission in this area defaults or starts at 6%, which obviously gets split between the buying and the sell side. And that can be negotiated down some depending on a myriad of factors. But the point is that you have a lot of those fees are coming from the seller. So the seller, even if they have had appreciation on a home, which they almost definitely do in this area, just due to the sheer, they still have to assume that they're going to be losing 7% just on the transactions being sold itself. So if you are going to be here, so my usual number, and you can tell me if you agree with this, is if you're going to be here for if you're going to be here, or own and keep onto that property for 3 years or more, you should consider buying.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if you aren't going to, then that's where the timeline is where you start saying maybe renting is better.
Right. For the people who is in the DMV, and also like just even the work landscape has changed a little bit. Well, a lot. Of being able to work virtually, right? Like my firm is virtual. My firm has always been virtual, even before the pandemic. And so we're kind of like transient. I can live here if I wanted to, but I own a home, so I'm kind of staying put. But if you don't know where your career is going to take you in the next 3 to 5 years, just like you said, Alison, it probably makes sense to rent, right? Especially if you're thinking of a career change, if the company that you are looking to work for, if they want you in the office, or if it's like, we really want you in California, if it's a tech company, then maybe renting right now over the next couple of years makes sense versus buying. However, if like this is kind of home for you, and this is going to be your home for at least the next 5 years, then buy. Because as we know, Alison, home prices are just going to continue to rise.
Well, before we went to recording and you and I were talking, something I said to you is that I don't feel is, maybe I don't say it enough, but I don't hear it enough. In this area in particular, especially if we're talking about DC, not Maryland and Virginia so much, as you can't build up that high because of the restrictions. So the buildings that are going up are going to be limited. And so it's almost like, unless you're, going to some of the areas that have land to develop, it's like a 1-for-1 trade, like one house might get renovated or, demolished and rebuilt or whatever, but you don't have these huge buildings going up, giving a ton more housing. And specifically single family houses and townhomes, those are, it's almost impossible to
it's build. It's a dime a dozen in DC. Seriously.
It's very hard. Yeah. So, so I think that, that's not, and again, if you're kind of considering what you're going to do for the next couple of years, but that you can rent your place out, that's an actual option for you. And you can become a landlord and hold on to that property for at least 3 to 5 years, then I still think you can buy, right? And you don't have to necessarily think about renting.
Yeah. And this is when I think we're still in agreement. And I think this is where just knowing your life and do you have time to be a landlord, right? I think that is a question. And if not, totally fine, but make sure that you can afford to hire a property manager. And typically property managers take about 10% of the rent. And so even considering their cut, like, are you still turning a profit, right? I mean, and if you're not that much, that's okay, because the people who are renting from you, they are paying down your mortgage. And so you're still building equity. So that's good. But just try to understand, do you want to have that headache? Because yes, it is another headache. However, it is a part of your investment portfolio. And so it's worth it in the long run. We have quite a bit of clients who have property here because they have decided to move away. And so hiring property managers is a solution to that.
Well, we have done episodes on property management and have owning rentals and Airbnbs and the whole thing. So people can refer back to those episodes if they'd like.
Sweet. Look at you.
Okay. So we won't belabor that one. So the how long you're going to live there is, for me, a really big factor. But the second thing is, what is the cost of renting a similar home? So if we're talking about buying versus renting, then you really start at some point looking at the payments, right? You're saying, okay, well, right now, again, it's interesting because people are starting to talk about loans that have ARMs, so adjustable rate mortgages.
Ooh. Oh, yeah.
Which are a little bit scary because they're scary for people because ARMs were partially involved with the meltdown that happened, a decade ago. But in some cases, it makes sense to look at adjustable rate mortgages. But normally for the last couple of years, we've been talking about 30-year fixed mortgages. So you're going in and saying, I more or less know what my monthly payment is going to be in perpetuity. And I say mainly because taxes go up. And so that will, and your insurance could change a little bit. But generally speaking, the principal and interest that you're paying on a 30-year fix is going to stay the same.
Right.
So so if you're renting, what is the difference? And will your rent stay the same?
Right.
The answer is no.
As we saw at the top of this call, at the top of this conversation, that is not the case. And your rent is probably going to increase on an annual basis. And so when I hear this, I'm thinking about cash flow, right? So understanding, and when we have clients that are thinking about, should we rent versus buy? I'm like, all right, let's draw a line. Let's think about the pros and cons of purchasing a home right now. Let's think about the pros and cons of renting. The very first thing, Alison, you hit the nail on the head as far as like, how long are you going to be here? If you're going to be here more than 3 to 5 years, okay, let's continue this conversation. If you're telling me you're moving next year, no, we're done. You're going to rent because now we need to be stashing some funds or earmarking some funds towards your moving line item. So renting, understanding with rent, there's no property tax. There's no HOA fees unless you're in a condo. Then you could probably potentially have a condo association fee, but there's no checks to landscapers, snowplow, updating your garden with the perennials that bloom and die every year. Talking like a true homeowner over here. Maintenance cost, like there are things that are associated with purchasing a home that is not necessarily true when renting, right? And so with rent, it's just like, okay, at least for the next 12 months, I know what my payments are going to be. If something breaks, I call the maintenance person. If something happens, like there is someone else to call and you're not responsible. That's great. On the home owning side, going back to what you're mentioning from an investment standpoint, and even from a homeowner standpoint, for over the next 30 years, give or take, you're going to have the same type of monthly payment. And so for our clients who are thinking about buying, it's not only a line item of what your mortgage and interest is going to be and property taxes and insurance, but let's make sure, do you have a yard? Sometimes in DC, you might or may not have a yard. So that may or may not be. You're going to have
unless you're in a condo, if you're in a townhome, you're going to have some kind of yard or outdoor space usually.
Something. I remember when we purchased our first home, it was a townhome. And yeah, we had a backyard, but I was very proud of the little slab of space that we had for our garden. And so that's the only reason why I know about perennials. And I did it 1 year. We lived there for 10 years. I was like, this is a headache. But anyways, and then we just put some like mulch and bushes there, but it was still cute, but no curb appeal from a cute flowery standpoint. Anyways, also from a just from a homeowner standpoint, just understand that there's going to be some additional costs. That's not to scare you, but to make you aware from a cash flow standpoint. Let's just add those line items. And what we tell our clients is let's just plan for them as if they are going to happen. So let's just create a line item for it. Let's put money aside on a monthly basis so that when something happens, there's money there for you. And so you don't necessarily need to build up consumer debt, such as like a credit card, to pay for things.
Well, this is why the how long you're going to stay there piece is the most important to me and makes sense, because rent prices are in essence building in all of that stuff, that the improvements and the thing for that they're building it into your payment.
Yeah.
And they will continue to go up every year. In the beginning, in the first couple of years of your ownership, owning a home, it may feel like, and it actually truly is, that you're paying more per month when you're talking about the maintenance and your monthly payment and everything you are. But because that more or less stays the same and your rent predictably will continue to go up, sometimes in a large amount, like in the example of your friend in Florida, then, at some point there is a transference between when it is more advantageous to rent and when it's better for you to own. And the thing is, like, you can actually have somebody run a projection for you on a specific property versus a comparable rental to show you when that timeline is, like, it's like, at 6 years, it becomes, for example, it becomes advantageous for you to live in the home forevermore versus renting, because you will have a consistently much lower payment.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, the when you're talking about rents, I think this leads us into the next part of the conversation, which is important, which is down payment, because we're talking about monthly cost. Right. And a lot of the time, these mortgage calculators that people are looking at are defaulting to a 20% down or a down payment. In DC, the average home price is I think in the mid 600,000s. So, I mean, this is obviously talking about, this is averaging out everything between studios and single family homes. That's over $500,000 and the average sale. And so when you're talking about a down payment for that, that's a lot of money. So
that's $120,000.
Right.
20%.
Right. So the question is not just what your monthly payment is going to be. I mean, it is, but it's like, what is that monthly payment based on whatever money you can put down? Because you can get low down payment options. My first home I ever bought was an FHA loan. I put 3.5% down. Yep. I bought a condo for under $300,000. It ended up being an amount that I was able to save relatively quickly for, and kind of get that. And then of course my payment was higher per month. And but that was I knew I was going to keep that property for a very long time. That was a
trade-off, right?
Right.
Of not putting the 20% down. So this is a conversation we have a lot too. Is just like, well, I can't afford a home. I'm like, okay, tell me more about that. And it's like, well, I don't have the 20% down. I'm like, well, you don't technically have to have 20% down, especially for first-time home buyers. There's first-time home buyer programs, especially in the DC area, or in just in the DMV area in general. We had a first-time home buyers program in Maryland that we went through, where they help you with the assistance of the down payment. It's a 0% loan, but when you sell the home, then you have to pay back, of course, the loan. But it was 0% interest, so it was just like, okay, this is fine. I don't care. But with the 20% down, I think that's a myth. So I don't know if you have like Mythbuster. Boom, Mythbuster. You don't have to put 20% down.
I need graphics for the podcast.
Right. But the trade-off there, right. But the trade-off there is PMI, right? And principal mortgage insurance, which again, there's trade-offs, right? I would rather pay that and know that this is going to be my monthly payment versus knowing that questioning if I can afford rent the next year. And honestly, that's what made my husband and I decide to buy, because we were living in Fairfax and our rent just kept like increasing. I'm like, this is insane how much we're paying.
Well, and you have no, I mean, we could go so many different directions with this episode, but I mean, you have no like a literal ownership over that, but you can't even like when you keep paying more and more and well, at some point you normally ask like, why, like, what am I getting out of this? Like, is the hands off, not being able, not having to personally deal with the HVAC, is that worth me continuing to pay 3% to 5% more every year? I think at some point people say no. Right.
Yes.
Yeah, like you. Yeah, exactly. Raise your hand.
You don't have the graphics. I'll raise my hand.
And so another thing that time kind of solves is kind of what we're talking about right now, which is, inflation and interest rates and things like that changing. Is that, I again say very often that I think owning real estate is a long-term game. It is like keeping money in the stock market and not moving it around all the time, and just knowing that over time things are going to go up, because that's also what happens in the stock market. If you're always trying to play everything every single day, you're going to have big losses. You might have big wins. But, housing in general, especially in this area, will always continue to rise and always go up. And it's a good long-term investment. So let's kind of sum up some other things real quick. So this isn't a 5-hour long episode, but
I have something else to consider too, especially if you're going to transition to be a homeowner, is the tax benefits of it.
Yes.
And mortgage interest is deductible on the first $750,000 of the purchase price of the home, and then we used to get a lot of property taxes and incentives before the SALT Act passed. I think it was like the State and Local Tax Act. So now it's capped at $10,000 if you're married, filing jointly. But hey, we're not getting into numbers here. But anyways, sorry, that CFP hat just went on. No, but there are tax benefits to owning a home, and that can shift you from being a standard deduction versus itemized deduction, which again, itemized deduction gives you a better tax benefit and a tax break when it comes to filing your taxes. Not sure when this podcast will air or interview will air, but we are just right off the tax season. And if you are a renter and felt like a few hits then and want to consider to stay in this area for a while, then maybe it's time to kind of shift and become a home buyer. Home office deduction is one of them that you can take as a homeowner. If you're renting, no, you're not supposed to take a home office deduction. If you listen to those TikTok experts, and I'm saying air quotes here, and took a home office deduction and you're a renter, let's just pray you don't get audited, because audits are also up, especially in DC. We had a few clients who got audited, just random, but here we are. So don't listen to those TikTok experts.
TikTok experts.
That can be a whole nother.
I should just get a panel of TikTok real estate experts and have them on and ask them like real estate questions and see
if they actually
and then
know
I'll
what
have the
they're talking
graphics,
about.
like the yes, the no graphics that will fly up on the screen.
Like Mythbuster. Yeah. It looks like we both have some issues in both of our sectors with TikTok. Anyways.
Well, you said something before we got recording too that I thought was something that you should point out, which is student loans.
Ah, yes.
So I'll say this. So right now it's April 2022, and you can kind of say your part in a second, but things are vastly changing as far as what restriction or which things have changed during the pandemic are coming back, right? And so something that was also, there was also a moratorium on payments for student loans for a long time. And I interestingly asked one of my lender friends the other day, I said, do you guys account for the fact that people have these loans, but they aren't paying for them? And they said, yeah, we see it, but just because they qualify for something or the numbers work, mentally, if you have to start paying this amount back and you're thinking, oh, well, I still have $700 a month to go to the restaurants and bars, and then I have, $400 to do whatever, like that, something's going to change. Something's going to have to change when those payments start coming in.
Yeah, this is a very interesting time for all of us, especially new college graduates and recent college graduates who have graduated in the past 2 years. They have never had to make a student loan payment. If you were in the federal government student non-private student loans, you have not had to make a student loan payment. And so again, my financial planner hat is coming on. I'm like, oh, lifestyle creep. Do not let that happen, right?
Yep.
And what I mean by lifestyle creep is the earnings that you have on a monthly basis, each one of those dollars are accounted for. And if each one of those dollars are already accounted for and you haven't accounted for your student loans, you're going to be in a whole heap of trouble when student loans come back in. So what's kind of like in the noise or in the news right now is that August 31st, we should probably know more, is if they're going to get pushed again as far as like coming back and starting to pay student loans, or if we're not. I have some thoughts on that, but that is actually another podcast that you can do.
I mean, I've thoughts on what's going to happen with the economy when that happens, but
they think inflation is high now. So, so what you want to keep in mind is those student loan payments are real. And unless there's some wide sweep of forgiveness for everybody, then these are coming back. I don't think that's going to happen. Maybe this $10,000 swipe for everybody may or may not happen. Who knows? But that's only going to decrease your overall monthly student loan payments by a smidget. So if you are a new graduate or a recently new graduate, please remember to just kind of mentally just start preparing yourself to keep that extra cash flow or disposable cash flow available when you are renting or when you are going in to purchase a home. Because if they do kick back in later this year or even next year, you don't want to be at risk of either losing your home or getting kicked out because you can't pay your rent. On the flip side, something else that we want to think about when it comes to student loans is probably just start earmarking it. You said something that is so important, Alison. It's like the mental piece of paying this student loan. And I was listening to a really good podcast the other day about just in depth about what's happening with the student loans, what's going to happen, the servicer, everybody's kind of like rusty. And so it's not even if the student loans are going to kick back in, it's more so of like, are the servicers even ready to receive this money? Because they've been out of practice for the past 2 years. And two of the biggest servicers for the federal student loans was just like, peace. I don't think y'all know what y'all doing. So we out. We out. So a lot of interesting things are happening. Mentally, I think it's going to be very hard for everyone to go back paying student loans because there has been this reprieve of, not paying them, and just don't get caught up when it comes to fruition.
And to bring this back to buying, if you are somebody who has not paid, either you haven't paid in a long time or you've never paid, you haven't never paid or you haven't paid in a long time your student loans, then I would really take a good look at that. Really have a talk with yourself and say, is this, it might feel like you're making a sacrifice to buy your home, because if it simultaneously is happening as you start having to pay your student loans again, it could potentially feel like a big smack. So that's something just kind of additional for people to think about. Well, I'll start kind of leaving everybody with this. I do truly think that a lot of this comes down to not only your personal, situation, but also who you're talking to and what their opinion is on the fact. And I pulled some really, I think, good articles online. I just started doing what I thought any person might do who's asking this question. I Googled, should I rent or should I buy? Because that's what people do, right?
Yeah.
And I found some really interesting, articles, one from NerdWallet. And then it was like out of the sky came this Wall Street Journal article that came out the other day. And I'm just going to read what they said in this because I just thought it just resonated with me. But it said, I was talking about right now in this current climate. It says, given all this, should you buy now or worry that if you do, house prices will crash? Buy now. Houses, like most physical assets, retain their real value during high inflation and have done far better than most such assets. So it goes on to say more, but I mean, that really truly does kind of encompass my feeling on buying. Again, if you're here for longer than a couple of years, and I think that buying is usually the way to go. But please know that if you talk to somebody, either a financial planner or parent or a realtor, who tells you that there's only one direction to go, that you have to buy or you have to rent, that they're probably not really thinking about the full picture and your full picture. Right. And that's what's truly important. So anyway, Rianka, I want to again thank you for being here. I will definitely be linking your information in the show notes. So if people want to start engaging with somebody who will help them look at the full picture and decide if this is what decision is right for them. And beyond this, maybe just general financial advice, and they can contact you. Of course, people know they can reach out to me if they have any questions about any of the process. And no, I work with renters as well. So I'm happy to have that conversation and go down that road with people too. And thanks again for joining.
Thank you so much, Alison.